Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Victory Over Self Radio. Victory Over Self, diving into all things athletics. We're pumped today to have on a former Liberty alumni. So you know that's going to be a good one. Liberty University in Richmond, Virginia. We welcome on this evening Aaron Wood. Aaron started out his roots, like Ross and I, here in the Virginia area. And then he went north, and then he went south. But you can't deny it. Virginia always pulls you back in. Aaron has trained under a world record bench presser. He has been able to learn under I'm going to call him an award-winning author, and we are incredibly excited to dive into everything and anything that all entails. Aaron, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Now, what the people want to know, the former Liberty grads want to know, in your opinion, if they entered the octagon tonight, who would win in a fight, Dr. David Horton or Dr. Linda Farber?
Ooh. I feel like Horton's got some pretty well-known physical weaknesses that Dr. Farber probably could target.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Farber's probably meaner, so I will bet my money on Linda over David.
All right. Yeah. As I was thinking that one up, I was like, who's going to be my horse in the race? And I was going to go with Dr. Farber as well. I think she's been hitting the weights a little more these past 2 decades than Dr. Horton probably has.
That's probably true.
Yeah, and would have that advantage. But you're over at D1 in Midlothian in Richmond right now, just making kind of that transition in back to sort of the private sector. Just, real quick, how's that been? What's it been like for you?
What's been different? Biggest appeal was it's really twofold. One was the hours are a lot more predictable and a little bit less of a slave to whatever the sport coach wants or whatever fire needs to get put out at whatever hour. So that was part of it. But the biggest part of it was I met my fiance in July, and so she's got her roots down here, and I was much more mobile. And so I knew that if I was going to pursue her, I was going to be the one that needed to move. And so I was happy to do that. And so that's been the best part is being around her, being around my family. It's a different situation work-wise. It's definitely a different age group, different demographics. It's a little bit less of the tight-knit team, us versus everybody else type dynamic that you get at collegiate. And I think that's the only part that I really miss is kind of being in the weight room with your teams and it, competing against a common enemy. On the private side, you're a hired gun, and you've got a relationship for as long as they want to buy training sessions, and then when it's done, it's done. And and it's like, I've got football players and softball players from Belhaven that still text me months after I left. If I stopped training with you on the private side last week, chances are I'm not going to hear from you. So it's a very different dynamic in that regard. But that's the trade you make for being where you want to be and having a work-life balance that is actually a work-life balance.
It's incredibly interesting you mentioned of not having that like team dynamic of having an enemy or the common goal of, we got to win this weekend. I've only been in the college sector, so I never really pieced that part together, but I could see how that's a huge chunk of your identity as a program and as a team. You all have that enemy that you're trying to go and destroy on the weekend or whatever. So that's interesting. But it also must be incredibly validating for you to still have those players that you invested so much in still reaching out for you and reaching out to you.
Yeah, that's the coolest thing, and that's made the transition easier, because I know that other coaches that have left collegiate and either retired or maybe they got fired and didn't immediately go to another collegiate role. It's like it's who you are. It's every waking moment of your life is consumed with thoughts about team stuff. And then all of a sudden that just stops. And you're kind of left to figure out, like, who am I without this in my life anymore? And so I think you always, while you're in collegiate, you're sitting there hoping and praying that you're making an impact, but there's no way to measure that. It's like the kids don't have an option to who to train with. They have to come to you. And so when you remove yourself from that situation, all of a sudden the relationship changes and talking to you is an option for them. And so when they choose to pursue a relationship or continue to have a relationship with you, yeah, it is validating, and it lets you know that what you did actually mattered. And I think for strength and conditioning coaches, that's a big deal, because you're, in a lot of places you feel like you're kind of tucked away down in the dungeon of the weight room, and you're not as visible as a lot of the other coaches on campus. And so I think that's a bigger deal for coaches. I was super blessed though at Belhaven. I got to interact with the school president on a fairly regular basis. Like, he knew my name. If I saw him, he shook my hand.
Awesome.
I wrote him a letter when I left and said, I really appreciated the opportunity, because it changed my life. He didn't really know where I was at personally before I took the job, but it was, I don't say it saved my life, but it's close. And so I kind of shared that with him, and he wrote me back something that was just extremely heartfelt and personal. And I don't know how many university presidents ever have a relationship like that with their strength coach. Maybe Nick Saban has that with the president of Alabama, but so that was always special, and it's been a special kind of transition because of those people that have chosen to continue to reach out to me.
I say this all the time. As coaches, we are constantly pouring ourselves out, sowing seeds, so very rarely do we get to see the fruits of our labor.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I'm like, man, I'm so happy for you that not only from the players, but coaches, and then even like the top dog at the school, you're getting just that, hey, thank you. Like, you did a great job here. You made an impact. Like, that's fuel that can keep you going for a long time. So
yeah,
that's awesome. And then something you mentioned there, and I'm real sensitive to it, so I don't want to kind of just breeze over it. You had a job and a career that you really loved, and you chose to leave that for somebody. And when I'm listening to podcasts with the biggest dogs and people I envy so much, and then they say, like, my ex-wife or my ex this, listening to a podcast recently with it was Mike Boyle, Fergus Connolly, Dan Papp, and Buddy Morris, and they all shared their personal relationship woes and how they almost lost their wives or whatever. I just think it's so important for coaches to kind of hear this, and hopefully you're kind of willing to share it. You're kind of faced with this decision: continue down this career path, or make a life change and a whole lifestyle change. Man, just kind of what went into that, what went through your mind, and what here you're on the other side now. I'm hoping you're going to say it was worth it and all that, right?
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, she's sitting next to me, so I'll talk about her. I'll talk about her while she's
good opportunity
right
for
here.
you. Yeah.
So you're 100% right, and there was getting to the point that I was at was rough, man. I get pretty choked up, so if I cry on the podcast, let's immediately shift gears to how much I bench press, so I can.
100%.
100%.
So there was a lot that went into getting to the point where I was at, and there was a lot of points along the way where it was like, man, am I cut out for this? And did I waste however many years of my life chasing something that I'm not good enough to actually get paid to do, And I quit the family business, felt like I left my dad hanging. There was a lot that when I was living in my car for a little bit, like, it was a lot. And so when I got to Belhaven, it was extremely validating, because it was like, man, it all paid off. I'm finally full-time. I have health insurance for the first time in 5 years. And so, and then you're in that world, and it consumes you. It is who you are. And And so, you know, I got to year 5 and had a great thing going. Football team was killing it. We went from 2-8 to 9-1. Um, the softball team was in the top 10 in the country every year. Went super regionals. Like objective level, we were doing really well. 17 or 18 NFL teams come to our practices and look at players this past year. Like we started having some notoriety. You know, I was just a small part of that. You know, and you know, I got 3,000 Twitter followers. I don't know if anybody's. So I was building a brand. Um, but so I'm in Richmond in July of last year, and I met this girl, and everything changed. And I went home and I asked myself if I was the head strength coach at Alabama 10 years from now, because I didn't pursue this girl, would I, you know, and it's Saturday night and you just beat LSU or something like that. Would I be sitting there wondering what if I had done things different, and like would I be able to live with that? And I felt like there was no way I could say yes to that. I felt like if I don't pursue this, I'll regret it every day for the rest of my life. And so she's had like a profound effect on me and made me want to pursue things that I'd never wanted to pursue before. And all of these things that seemed really, really important and just like critical, like I can't sacrifice this for anything or anybody. All of a sudden, I just didn't care about it anymore. It was just like, man, those things are replaceable, infinitely replaceable. And a job is where you work. You know, yeah, it's like coaching is a calling. You can go do it anywhere. And so I realized that, yeah, the regret of missing out on her was going to be much, much greater than any regret that I had leaving where I was. And so once I kind of came to that realization, which really didn't take very long, I met her July 5th. And I think by July 11th, I was ready to plant my seeds. And so yeah, after the first football game of the season, I told the head coach I wasn't going to come back, and started. I didn't have a job or anything. And what was crazy about the whole situation was, and you guys know this, like you get offers from other places and interest from other places, and every year I would get, you know, 1 or 2 calls or whatever. As soon as I said I'm not coming back, it was like 9 different places. And it was from like Power 5 football to overseas stuff to Division 1 basketball. It was all over the place. Like the New York Jets scout was at our practice and was like, "Have you ever thought about working in the NFL?" Like, so I was just like, you know what, God, you're testing me here. You're asking. It's like, are you really about this girl? And to be honest with you, there wasn't a single job offer that was even remotely tempting. It was just like, no, I'm going to Richmond and I'm going to be with her, and that's the end of the story. So, yeah, in a lot of ways, it was a hard transition, but it was probably the easiest decision I've ever made in my life.
Man, thank you so much for the honesty and the openness there, because somebody's gonna listen to this and it's gonna change their life. Like it's gonna absolutely be beneficial. I will say I don't want to speak for Ross, but I haven't had that crazy interest that you talked about there, so I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine that would be extremely difficult and tempting. But yeah, Aaron, just thank you so much for
Yeah.
that. And literally, even as you're talking, I was getting a little emotional thinking about, you know, my wife, my son, and I did something extremely similar. Made a move for love. Almost sold my house here in Lynchburg. Literally, we bought a house in North Dakota. We were going to move there to be closer to my wife's family, but praise God, she was up there and it was a terrible winter and decided, nah, this isn't for me anymore. And we were welcomed back here to Liberty. But thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So something Ross always likes to know too is just kind of like, hey, who's influencing you, who's making an impact on you. So Ross, kind of take it away here.
Before we get into that, that was an unbelievable 15 minutes of just talk, man. That was really good. You know, and we've all kind of been in that boat, where you talk about, man, are you good enough to do this? Are you good enough to get the right jobs and coach? And Chris Kerr doesn't know this, but like Chris Kerr basically changed my life because he hired me as a GA and then eventually full time. And, I kind of had I think I've told him this. I had a thing of in my head of, okay, if I can't get a full-time job by this time, like if it's not sustainable and I can't do it, then we're going to be fine. I'll go do something else, and that's okay. And thankfully
Yep.
it's panned out. And so I definitely appreciate that story, man. And that's awesome. But we'll shift gears so we don't have to get too emotional here to start.
Yeah.
So the Aaron, we all have a mutual connection through Liberty and Bill Gillespie,
Yep.
and you've been all over, and you've also you spent some time under Cal Dietz and obviously countless other coaches. And so, talk to us a little bit about who has really influenced you in terms of your training philosophy and kind of where you're at thought wise.
Yeah, Bill and Cal are probably the two. And, I was thinking about how those two guys kind of, are similar or different. In some ways, if we're talking strictly training, there's probably more similarities that exist than people would assume on the surface. I think if you dig down into the reasons why each guy does what they do, you would find a lot of similar stuff. Like, hey, we're chasing the same goal. The way that they implement it, or the tools that they use, or how complicated it is, or whatever, those are distinctly different. But if you are willing to dig a layer deeper and not look at triphasic and Bill in a vacuum, then you'll see that there's a lot of shared philosophy. And a lot of it, is like Cal's a big Louis Simmons guy. So there's a lot of those West Side style concepts that exist throughout triphasic. And same thing with Bill. They were both like, if you look at, I was watching one of y'all's videos. There was Chris talking about the clinic that we went to, the speed clinic, where Cal's son went through the workout, and it was just like you were shocked at how much just stuff there was in these workouts. Cal's athletes have an unbelievable work capacity, and if you listen to Bill talked work capacity all the time, and it was like Cal's explanation as to why that's important is much more scientific and probably verbose than Bill's, which is much more succinct. But they're talking about the same thing, like your ability to do stuff over and over and over and over again is going to dictate how strong you can get, how fast you can get, all of those things. And so that's a hallmark of both programs. It just how they get there looks totally different. So yeah, both guys have had tremendous influences on me with their training method. Bill more so, kind of, initially I was with Bill. Bill was the first, strength and conditioning internship experience I had, whatever. And, I came out of there thinking like, man, I just worked for like this world-class guy. I got this thing figured out so good. I don't need to learn another thing. And so I kind of went like a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. I was working on the private side, and I was using a lot of his stuff, if not just, I might have been using all of his stuff. I don't know if I had an original thought. I don't need to have an original thought because I'm just going to copy what he's doing. And then, wanted to get back into collegiate. And so I ended up in Minnesota, and I walked in the weight room with Cal. And first of all, there's no onboarding process at all. You just show up. It's like, hey, if your first day is Monday, May 19th, you just show up, and there's a workout card with about 10,000 different things on it. And there's nobody to tell you like what it means. They just hand it to you, and it's just like, all right, go coach. And so the whole first like 2 weeks, you're trying to figure out what in the world's going on. And I came from cleans, back squat, bench press, whatever, to now there's bands attached all over the place, and there's partial ranges of motion on everything, and nobody's squatting, and there's no cleans. And I'm like, what is going on? So I effectively had no knowledge of anything, starting out completely square one. But it forced me to kind of open my eyes up to a totally different way to accomplish the same. Both guys had unbelievably successful programs. So obviously there's more than one way to skin a cat. So So you try to learn what you can from both guys. But so Bill starting out, I think, was a great foundation because he is kind of more, it's like meat and potatoes, strength and conditioning with a spin on it, the kind of the West Side spin. And then Cal was, the biggest takeaway from Cal was just to question everything. And, you know, it doesn't matter how tried and true it's been for however long, you know, it might have been wrong the entire time that we've been doing it. And that led me to a lot of the decisions that I made in terms of programs with my athletes for the last 5 years was like, you know, it ended up being, when I first started, it was like, how much stuff can I pack into this hour? Versus what it ended up being was how much can I strip away from the program without giving up my main objective? You know, how do I simplify this more? And so it's just two very different ways to look at things as I kind of grew and evolved as a coach. But yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell. Bill was my base, and then Cal forced me to reevaluate everything and then and constantly learn.
So it's funny you mentioned work capacity, because that's something since being in the high school level, and you're seeing all these different youth athletes, man, that is by far the number one thing that they lack is just the work capacity. And it's interesting because for a very long time I did not think that. Like, I didn't think that, you know, this is the limiting factor for them right now. Like, it's their strength, it's their speed, or it's whatever. I personally right now, I'm like, if I don't address the work capacity issue first, then really the rest of the stuff doesn't matter, and they can get stronger and faster and more powerful through the work capacity work, especially with those young kids. Like, they're going to get better that way. But it's been interesting as I've seen these kids work, and I'm like, gosh, man, I got to really bring that up. So with that, when you are, let's assume that you want to attack work capacity first, what are going to be some ways that you go about that?
You know, with you know, my annual plan, uh, we would block out a chunk to really focus on that quality, and it would be different from sport to sport. And I got more cute with it as I went, broke it down into more kind of position group specific stuff, and a lot of that had to do with, you know, some Joey G stuff where he talked about energy system demands of different position groups, and one, I think kind of the main thing that kicked that off for me was when he was talking about linemen specifically and how different line play versus any other position is, and to the point where it's almost like another energy system that you're trying to develop where you've got another human being pushing on you, and it's not just stuff on air. And so I was like, all right, I have to kind of completely overhaul this and try to address more specifically some of the stuff that we're doing. So it wasn't anything overly complicated. You know, I started off with some tempo stuff, and we would do some aerobic blocks where we would do contralateral. We would do some of Cal's time set super endurance stuff. I ripped off a lot of the GPP stuff from Cal. With our lineman stuff, we did a lot of strongman stuff, circuits with sandbags, yokes, different kind of carries. And then with our skill guys, it was a lot of tempo running. We did some low intensity stuff too. I was a big fan of the mouth tape shut thing. So tape their mouth shut, set them outside, and we would slowly ramp up time doing that. But that, you know, that's, you know, kind of that early off season period. But then we would use not time sets, but turnovers. So we would control the rest intervals during the workouts to try to systematically, methodically progress the intensity of things from that kind of conditioning perspective in the weight room too. So that was something, and that was a Bill ripoff too. You know, as you went through the year, the time between sets of things or how many exercises you would put in a block, those were things that changed depending on the goal and where we were at in the calendar.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your practical experience of using or not using time sets. Because there's something for me that if I had the perfect setup and I could swing it, I would just do time sets on everything if I
Right.
could. Uh, and kind of get around that now through, okay, I know that roughly it's this many seconds per set. I can program this many reps. So realistically, that might be something you were able to do for all your groups, some of your groups, yes or no, but to kind of talk through the practicality of trying to make that happen.
Yeah, I found that it depended on the sport a little bit. Sometimes it depended on the exercise, whether that was truly a practical thing to do or not. I think you have to have, and this is my opinion, I think you have to have a fairly invested, I don't want to say high training age. You have to have like a fairly smart group of kids that kind of understand the concept behind a time set, which is like, hey, this is max effort for this prescribed amount of time. And I remember, Chris, you were talking about that workout that Cal's son did, where it kind of reset your idea of what intensity looked like.
Yes.
Like, and I just don't think there's that many kids that truly understand what that max intensity looks like. In the same way that like RPE scale doesn't really work for a lot of people because they don't know what an RPE 10 feels like. So how are they supposed to gauge what a 7 or an 8 feels like? So in a perfect world, yeah, I would use it on everything because I do want to be able to control what energy system I'm taxing, and I want to be super specific. I found that with my football guys on most things, it was not as practical just because the output that I was getting didn't really match what I wanted. And if I went with the traditional sets, reps, percentage based thing, I was getting the result that I wanted. There were some caveats to that. So like when we would do speed phase stuff, I would always do the time stuff. So if it was like the rebound method or the co-contraction stuff with bands, or if I was doing like a physio ball tantrum or something like that, then yeah, 10 seconds where it was like there was no, they couldn't pace themselves on the exercise. It's like they were able to connect the dots better on a physio ball tantrum than they were on like a bench press or a back squat for whatever reason. It was like they understood the concept of I need to kick my feet as fast as I can, but moving the barbell in like a ballistic type of way was a little bit different. Like there was kind of a disconnect. So it was easier for me to get what I wanted using the time sets kind of strategically on certain exercises. It just kind of felt like it lended itself better to those types of things. So 100%, once we got into like speed, hyper speed stuff, anything that we did like that, it was always 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds. But for my main stuff, we stuck to kind of the more traditional sets, reps, percentage based stuff.
Okay. This will be my last question before I pass it over to Chris, and then we'll kind of bounce around from there.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of in the middle of this personally with my kids. You may or may not program it. Do you do any phases of just lactate work where I'm trying to work on that a little bit?
Not not specifically. Like it's for me that kind of that we touch on that throughout the year. So no, I don't
Yep.
block out like a chunk of training time
Okay.
specifically for that stuff. No.
So hypothetically speaking, then, if you were going to implement some of that, if you needed to implement it a little bit, say like for your lineman, for example, because it's a little bit of a different energy system, kind of like we talked about, and you got into that with a little bit with your strongman stuff. If you really
Yeah.
think about it, do you think it's best to do that stuff through time or through setting them up for distances or things
Yeah.
of that nature? What do you think is
Yeah.
best in terms of to hit that?
We would do distance based stuff because I felt like you were kind of dangling a carrot. And if I was doing a good job of kind of prescribing, then I was going to get what I wanted out of it. I think that, like I said, unless you've got a kid that's wired a certain way where they're just willing to completely empty the tank and just almost kill themselves, I think they're always gonna hold back a little bit on things where you're like, hey, just go to failure, or go as far as you can, or whatever. So, and I think there were some things that I would do where I would it was the distance stuff specifically where I would choose things where I was like, that's and then after the fact, be like, that was pretty, I don't know what I was thinking there, but, I don't know, I kind of undersold them, like they would go impress me with something like that. So, yeah, those types of things where I can give them kind of a benchmark to shoot for. I think they responded a little bit better too.
Yeah, I find with the strongman stuff that I've implemented and used, because I got some ideas from you. We talked a little bit about it. Uh, with our high school kids, the distances are definitely the way to go. Of hey, we got to get 60 yards of this trap bar carry. We got to come up and back or sled push, whatever it may be.
Mm,
The only part I'm trying to figure out a little bit, because we're doing I'll say that kind of like the next 2-3 weeks is kind of a lactate block for us. And it's kind of naturally one because we just have our football team is doing basically a boot camp kind of instruction deal for the next couple of weeks. So it's kind of naturally one. And
yeah.
so before this, we did 6 weeks of aerobic building up to that because I knew that
Mm,
was coming. And
right.
so we did that. And then afterwards, I'm probably never going to touch any lactate again. I'll just do a bunch of aerobic and peaking
Right.
back and forth. But yeah, I haven't. I've done it a little with the sets and reps, like doing sets of 10, and it's 5, 6, 7, 8 minute sets or whatever. And that's kind of something we'll get into a little bit. But again, a lot of it's just been distance and strongman. But I'll pass it over to Kerr here because I know he's going to have some good questions for you.
No, I appreciate it. I enjoy hearing about other sports. Like I'm just in the hockey world now. And I'm like, you don't run a lactate block? Like preseason, we try to murder them with acid. Like that's the goal is to inoculate them basically before practices start, and the coaches
Sure.
run them into the ground a little bit there. I wanted to go back quick, Aaron, on this question that's popped in my head as you're talking about kind of your annual plan and incorporating some phases, so to speak. When you were with Cal, was he using 1020 tool? Was he profiling off the 1080? And then are you incorporating that as well? Do you do any sort of like force velocity or speed kind of profiling? And are you building that into your programs and system?
Yeah. So Cal, this was, uh, hopefully he doesn't listen to this. Put him on blast a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, so on the ad where you respond to it,
Hmm.
it's like, you're going to learn Omega Wave and you're going to learn 1080 and you're going to learn, it's like this list of tech that's, gazillions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they, at some point along the way, like in the 12-month year, I know that he uses all of those things,
Hmm.
but it's not a daily thing.
Yeah.
And it's a funny story about the Omega Wave specifically. He would talk about Omega waving his athletes and, getting their readiness and whatever. And then it's like, but you know what? Like, now I can just look in their eyes and I can just tell what their training status is. And it was like, man, Cal, that is really cool, but that is not a marketable skill that I can put on my resume.
Yeah.
That I can, I just stare deeply into the athlete's eyes and I just know. So trust me, so anyway, um, I would have loved to have done a lot of that stuff. Sorry, back to Cal. So
Yeah.
no,
No, you're good.
when he wasn't using the 1020 tool yet.
Okay.
He introduced that at a clinic that I was at in Pensacola in like May of 2019.
Mm.
So I was about a year removed from when I was up there with him. He kind of pushed that out and started using that. We had just gotten the 1080s when I was up there, so we'd gotten one of the quantums, and then I think he had 5 or 6 of the 1080 sprints. Is that what they're called?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like I think it was 5 or 6 of them. So however many dollars that works out to.
A lot.
It's a
Yeah. A
chunk.
lot. Yeah.
And so we started using those up in the like the mezzanine kind of area up in the hockey arena. And he'd started messing around with resisted and assisted sprints with that. But he wasn't using that to profile anybody, I don't believe, yet.
Hmm.
As far as what I do or did, that was something that I always wanted to work toward. And I didn't have the skill set to do it. So I'm not an Excel whiz whatsoever. I'm like, I literally don't know how to put a formula into Excel. So I don't know how to build a workout card. It's like none of it. And so I'm at like that age where I'm like trying to find younger people to do things for me.
Yeah.
And so I had a guy I'll give him a shout out because he's an unbelievable young coach. His name is Nat Salberin, and he's currently the assistant director at Gardner Webb. When he applied to be my grad assistant, he was coming off an internship at Yale, and he worked at Sanford Power up in North Dakota, and he was an Iowa State grad. And really, really smart guy, like sharp. So he did his first year, and then I said, hey, if you want to, I'll hit up my buddy Pat Peterson at Pittsburgh, and I'll see if he can take you on as an intern. And so Pat took him on as an intern, and so he was the sports science intern with Pitt football for the summer of like 2022, maybe, or 2021. And so he learned R and became a whiz at using that as a tool to profile our kids. And as soon as he came back with that, it changed kind of what we were doing. So we didn't get overly complicated with it. We split guys up into Excel groups and top end speed groups. And then we based our speed program off of those. But it really wasn't any more complicated than that. So we had our phases during the year, and guys were thrown into a batch, either acceleration deficient or top speed deficient. And then we used Cam Jossie's sled acceleration protocol it was like 80% of body weight on the sled. We used that for our Excel guys, and then our speed guys ran flies. And that was it. And we saw ridiculous results just doing something that simple, a couple of days a week.
No, yeah, thank you for getting into that. And the simple stuff just works. It's like I've overcomplicated it because I have the means to, right? Technology and just an army of people. But it just like watered down the training. Trying to get too specific, I couldn't have my eyes on too many things.
Right.
So yeah, what you described it's not simple at all to do for like in reality, figuring out those guys and writing the programs, coaching them up on it. But yeah, it seems like it was pretty beneficial. So
yeah, it's like relative to what other people were doing, it was incredibly simple. Hey, we're doing two groups. I'm not, the linemen were still running the same flies that the skill guys were running. And same deal, we did our sled program based on body weight, obviously. But it was, I don't know, here's another Cal like nugget. Like if there's anybody that's written a more complicated program than Cal, I would love to see what it looks like. It'll melt your brain. But at the end of the day, when you have a conversation with him just about training, and he reduces it down to its like purest form, right? I'm not going to use the exact words that he uses because they're 4 letters, but he was like, just train hard. And it was just like, well, shoot, man, but if that piece of it is absent, then all of the other stuff really doesn't matter. It's like, if the intent's not there, if the effort's not there, if you're not coaching it hard, not in like a MF in the kids way, but if you're not paying attention, if you're not keeping the main thing, then all the bells and whistles, it's really for you. It's for you as a coach, so you can pat yourself on the back and take a video and put it up on Twitter so that it looks like you really know what you're doing. But at the end of the day, it boils down to like, are the kids really, really pushing themselves to the point of discomfort so that their body's forced to change? And I feel like so many people miss the mark on something so basic. It's like progressive overload is what that's the core of it, right? It's like, all right, well, that requires more effort tomorrow than it did today. Like, that's the whole principle. If you miss that, you're kind of just spinning your wheels.
That is a great quote right there. Progressive overload or training, whatever we want to call it, takes more effort tomorrow than it did today. Yeah, I think I've definitely been, I could, accuse myself of slacking off on coaching the effort side of it. Because I think like this is the best program we could possibly run, the best workout today. But if it's just not coached extremely well and the effort isn't there, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So, yeah, really good life lesson there. So Aaron, now you're kind of back into the private sector, coming from college. Kind of as Ross touched on there, a diverse range of experiences and where you've been. I just found out you went to a clinic out in, oh no, that was in Florida.
Mhm.
I just mixed up Pensacola with Pepperdine out in Malibu. Okay, that's my bad.
Same,
There.
same.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
was there on Sunday. I was in Malibu on Sunday, believe it or not. But yeah,
Oh, no way.
yeah,
What
yeah.
brought you out there?
Uh, took the fiance out there, and I've got a very generous uncle that let us stay in his penthouse apartment for free in Santa Monica, and
No way.
so we hung out and I went to Gold's Gym on Friday morning and saw Arnold Schwarzenegger and Robert Kennedy
Wow.
Jr. and uh,
Wow.
yeah, it was a whole. I guess we were out there for 5 days, but yeah, just a getaway. But yeah, we spent the day in Malibu on
Okay.
Sunday.
So you're gonna not be allowed to breeze over that.
Okay.
You see Arnold at Gold's. Do you have to? So I grew up very very close to the Jersey Shore, and
Okay.
when they were filming every other season, like if you were gonna get near them, you had to fill out a bunch of waivers, wait on a huge line. Was that similar at Gold's? Like you
No,
walk in
man.
the door and like, hey, Arnold's in here, sign this, don't talk to him.
I think the regulars kind of give him space, you know.
Yeah.
But no, he just pulls up on his bike and he drives his bike into the lobby and puts it next to a plant, and then says hey to the guy at the desk, and then him and a couple of the dudes that he was with, they went outside to the outdoor workout area and hit some arms or something, and it was very low key. I don't know if he had security just everywhere around him and I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
But Robert Kennedy Jr. probably had more people talking to him than anybody else in the gym. You had Mike O'Hearn was in there. You had like several fitness celebrities,
Yeah.
and Robert Kennedy Jr. was getting bothered more than anybody else in there.
Just the time of year it is and all that. I could believe that one. Did you go at a specific time of like, oh, I'm going to see Arnold
Oh
there?
yeah,
Just
100%.
oh, okay,
I was told that he goes at 7 a.m. He was a little late. Showed up at 8:30.
okay.
But yeah, I wasn't. It's a $50 day pass, so I was doing this. It was one shot. I wasn't
Yeah.
going back for a
Yeah.
for a second round. So yeah, I tried to make it as high chance of success as I could.
Okay. There's not many people that could say I worked out in the same building as
That's
Arnold
right. That's
on the
right.
same
Breathe the
day.
same air. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll get you a long way with, we're just going to call it today's generation of kids, but anyone, let's just say 30 and above is going to be
Yeah,
absolutely fired up
that's right.
to hear that one. But okay, so your diverse range of experiences back in the private world. Where are you going now for just your continuing education? What are you trying to learn? Is there still some big pillars left in the S&C world, or are you now like, man, I gotta learn a little bit of business, learn a little bit of networking? Talk to us about
Yeah. So my background before I got into strength and conditioning was I worked for my dad, who's an investment advisor.
that.
And so I did that for probably 4 years. I was doing that while I was still an undergrad at Liberty. And um, so I had an understanding of business and economics and supply demand relationships. And to be honest with you, it was invaluable when I got to time to budget when I was the director of a strength and conditioning department. And, you're sitting there having a conversation with the athletic director trying to get funding for something. And, you know, I don't know if most strength coaches could have a conversation with them about like, hey, I can understand where you're coming from, and you know, you try to speak the language a little bit, and so it would be like, hey, I don't need money for this. I really need to prioritize this, and they appreciated the fact that I was coming from kind of a business minded perspective when it came to stuff that I wanted for the weight room. So that was super super valuable. And then like the sales aspect of it, like that helps with private sector stuff because there is a sales piece to it um, that exists. And that's not, I don't crave that. I don't love selling. I
Mhm.
find it easier to do now that I have the experiences that I've had versus when I was trying to do it before. Because, hey, I've worked with Olympians. That's pretty marketable. So you throw that in a sales pitch a couple of times, and people are much more likely to listen to what you have to say. Um, So yeah, it's a different animal, for sure. As far as like where I'm kind of looking within strength conditioning to learn and grow. Um, I have probably like the coolest network of guys that I could ever ask for. That are kind of we're all kind of in the same place career wise. It was basically all the guys I interned with at Minnesota, and we all kind of went different directions, but just some unbelievably smart guys. So we've got a group chat where we just talk, and we've had it for 4 years, 5 years. And so we'll kick around, and, Pat Peterson's in it, Brandon Wickett, who was the head guy at UMass when they won the Natty, and now he's working with the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah.
He's in it. I'm trying to think. There's a guy, Nate Wells, who's a really, really good sports science guy that's in up in Minnesota. Regan Quall, who was Cal's full-time assistant before the guy he has now. So just like some guys that are smart, that have been around, that have kind of thought outside the box. And so we'll just talk shop and exchange ideas. I mean, I get more out of that a lot of times than I do out of watching a seminar or lecture or whatever. So, and that's just casual, back and forth that it happens, naturally over the course of the year. But on that GA that I talked about, Nat Sauberin, he's unbelievably smart. We talk shop all the time. So it's less of like a formal, here's the resources that I go to, and it's a lot more of just talking to guys that are smarter than me and picking their brain and asking them, hey, is this idea stupid? It sounds great in my head, but is this, does this make any sense to you at all? And I've said before, if you're a strength and conditioning coach and you don't constantly have imposter syndrome, then you're not hanging around with people that are smart enough. And you ought to go find another circle. I would, gosh, man, like I would be mortified if I was in a room of strength coaches and I was the smartest person in the room. Like that must be a really dumb collection of people. And so I just don't have any desire to be around that, I used to think that whole like surround yourself with motivated, like-minded people that are chasing something. I used to think that was kind of like that, I don't know, that Oprah just word vomit stuff is like meaningless, And the experience that I had when I was in Minneapolis is what changed all that, because that was the first time that I'd ever just like been immersed in that. Like every single guy that was there working for free, had traveled from somewhere far away to come there because they realized like Cal is the guy that I want to learn from. And rather than doing an internship down the street at the local college with that strength coach, I'm going to pack my stuff and move across the country to go learn from this guy. And so I think it attracted a certain type of people. And I think I had a moment where I kind of realized like, man, I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that are chasing this thing hard. And it makes me want to be way, way better. And so that desire to find those types of people everywhere I go, that's been a life changer. It's just the idea of being stagnant is just it's turns my stomach. Just getting stuck in a rut and continuing to do the same things you're doing all the time, never evolving. If you look at my programs from year 1 compared to year 5, they don't look anything alike.
Yeah.
And thank God, because gosh, the year 1 stuff was like some intern could have written this thing. It was terrible. So I think that's something. Once I got into strength and conditioning, it was just different than every other pursuit that I'd ever really kind of gone after. It was a constant desire to get better and find smarter people to learn from, and so like if Cal Dietz can sit there and go to lectures to try to learn from people, then I'm certainly not above that at all. So if he's doing it, it must be good enough for me,
Yeah. Did you have a lot of interns or just like undergrads or anything like that at Belhaven?
I wish I did. I tried to get an intern thing going,
Hmm.
And we would have work study students that were there to get hours,
Yeah.
but they weren't. They didn't have really a big strength and conditioning kind of theme to their exercise science department. It was
Hmm.
more clinical.
Yeah.
So it's funny, probably the only guy that I got out of that is currently Cal's assistant at Minnesota. So his name's Cody Anderson.
No way.
Uh, yeah. So
Wow.
Cody, I was speaking to a class at Bellhaven. It was a football class, and the offensive coordinator at the time asked me if I would come in and just talk about football strength conditioning. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I was probably, I don't know, I was probably supposed to talk for 40 minutes, and I talked for like 15. And then I was just like, all right, well, that's all I have. So you guys can go. And they were juiced because they got out of class 25 minutes early.
Yeah.
And, and so Cody came up to me afterward. He was like, hey, I want to be a strength coach. And I mean, so nervous that he could barely form a sentence.
Hmm.
And I was like, sure, you can come to the weight room at 5 a.m. when I have baseball tomorrow if you want. And so sure enough, he showed up, and the kid never left.
Wow.
And then once I got him a key, he started showing up at like 4:30, and I'd walk in at 6, and Cody'd be an hour deep in some lecture that he'd taken notes on, and he'd hand me a notebook, and he'd be like, hey, I watched this lecture on blah, 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 if you want to look at my notes. And I was like, man, I was feeling pretty motivated, or pretty accomplished. Like I got to work at 6.
Yeah.
And then I was like, am I lazy because I'm not in here at 4:30 watching lectures and taking notes? So anyway, I got him out of the student body, and then he worked for me that next year and did an unbelievable job. And he went up and interned for Cal over the summer,
Hmm.
and then went down to Tarleton State for a year as a GA. And then Cal called him up and brought him back to Minnesota to be his full-time guy. Um, so, but I did have some great GAs in my time there. Cody was great. Nat was unbelievable, and he's going to do unbelievable. If somebody's listening and doesn't follow Nat Salbrin, they need to, because I think he's 24, 25, and he's as smart as you can be, and actually trains. And he's done a really, really good job everywhere he's ever been. So, so he's a up and comer for sure.
Well, Cody owes you a lot. You made him famous on YouTube for 5-second clips of pulling or pushing a band or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Oh,
right.
that's awesome. And honestly, the reason I asked was just from what you shared of making a family move towards the beginning, and then I'm just gonna call it like, hey, never stop learning, never always make sure you're not the smartest guy in the room. That's just great life advice for somebody that wants to enter this career. Great advice overall. So I didn't know if you had, in your past, a lot of people that you were able to guide, lead, mentor, or if that was something that you enjoyed. So yeah, I just kind of
No,
wanted to know.
yeah. So Cody and Nat have been two of the, I wish my coaching tree was bigger, but those two guys, it's like you see something in someone, and then you're motivated to help them avoid the mistakes that you made. Like, I want you to get to where I'm at, but I want you to do it 10 years faster than I did it. And I took the same approach with my players. I try to have really raw conversations with them about, like, hey man, I've probably messed this thing up 100 different ways. Let me tell you all the ways that you can screw this situation up so that you can avoid those. Um, I try to do that with the GAs too. And shoot, man, Cody went up there and was working with Cal, and he's assisting with the Olympic team and all this other stuff. And the guy was like 23 years old. I'm like, 23 years old, I had just started going back to Liberty. And then Nat left as my GA. He finished his GA, and his first job after being a D3 GA was he was the director of football at Morehead State, which is an FCS school.
Wow.
And I was just like, tell me how many guys go from D3 GA to director of an FCS, football program. So, so I take some pride in whatever I instilled or helped them with that prepared them to move from where they were to a much, much higher level of, expectation, performance, play, whatever. To me, that's the coolest thing in the world. And I still have a great relationship with them. And what's cool for me I sound like the most insecure person in the world because I keep using the word validation, but there is that small college thing where it's like or Chris, like for you, and Ross too, like y'all are club sports, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's not the prestige of whatever, right? And so I think on some level you sit there and wonder, like, does anybody even care what I have to say? I'm just whatever, or like Ross with you with the high school thing. Like, there's people that think high school strength and conditioning is glorified PE, and so on some level you have like a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because you're not at the pinnacle of the profession, so to speak, or whatever. But it's been cool to have both of those guys. They still talk to me as if, my opinion is relevant to them, or they'll ask like, "Hey, what do you think?" And that's neat too, because it reinforces the fact that it truly doesn't matter where you are. You're either doing a really good job or you're doing a really bad job, and you're just working with different caliber athletes depending on the level that you're at. But if you identify your value or your competency as a coach with the level that you're at, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice.
You got to surround yourself with some young people if you're not doing that already. You have a lot of great wisdom to give off here. I don't know if like you feel that way.
No,
but yeah, but
no,
from what
we just covered the I need validation constantly.
yeah, it's like I'm just loving everything that you're saying, and I try to think of like I had 5, 6, undergrad, intern, work study people in my weight rooms today. And like, I don't invest a lot in them. I'm just super self-absorbed in coaching my athletes, especially
Right.
as we're, nationals is coming down the pipe. But everything you're saying, I'm just like, shoot, I hope I give that off to,
Mm-hmm.
these kids. And I hope I say that in the way that Aaron is saying it. So
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if you're going to get, interns or whatever at D1, but just know from my perspective, you're saying all the right things, and I
Appreciate
absolutely
it.
love it. Yeah, no, for sure. So we kind of touched on it a little bit there, but maybe there's a little bit more to kind of draw out. What's catching your eye right now? What's out there? Not necessarily on social media, but hey, this one thing I want to really kind of dig into a bit more and try to learn as much as I can.
Yeah. So my last year and a half-ish at Belhaven, I kind of shifted what I was doing, especially in season, but a little bit. It started to influence the off-season stuff a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Was training that was it was very outcome based and not exercise based.
Mm.
It was heavily influenced by training residuals. And so I started to and it's a little bit of the 10-20 from Cal influence also. Where Cal would run everything in 2-week blocks. And so you do your 10-20 test, you test out for speed. You train speed for 2 weeks, you test again, and maybe you shift over to power, or maybe you shift over to strength or whatever. And everything was in these 2-week kind of mini cycles. And you would just kind of run that indefinitely, or in theory, that's what it looks like. And so, so between that concept and then training residuals, which prior to Minnesota, I really didn't even know was a thing. At least like I didn't know that there was a term for it. I think I knew it in theory, like not every training quality disappears at the same rate, right? But I didn't really know how to define any of that stuff. And so what I started to shift to was I looked at our year, particularly in season, and I would use the training residuals to dictate whether we were going to do a speed week or a power week or a strength week. And it was easier with football because football is so predictable and there's no midweek games and there's no, the schedule never changes. But I would look, our strength weeks, we were going to train 85%. And this is all, by the way, this is all lower body stuff. Okay. Upper body stuff, we train for strength year round because football players like to bench press. and I'm not trying to overcomplicate things. And they all wanted to do the Bill Gillespie bench program. So whatever. So we did that all the time. And that kind of dangled that like a carrot too. Like, hey, you give me what I want on these lower body days. And when we come in here for upper, I don't have to coach effort because everybody's going to get after it. So whatever. So with the lower body stuff, strength days or strength weeks, we were 85% or higher for sets of 1 to 3. If it was a speed week, usually I was between 25% and 50%. And I would use timed sets on those, or I would do, we would do it a couple of different ways. I might say, hey, do a set of 5 in as little time as possible. And then they would get competitive with how fast they could knock out 5 reps at 25% on a clock. Other times I would say, hey, go max effort for 5 seconds. And, on something like a trap bar deadlift or something that was kind of easy to execute with that, where there's no technique involved. It was just like be explosive for 5 seconds. And then power was anywhere between 55 and 70%. And it was oftentimes a lot of accommodating resistance. So those were the 3 different types of weeks that we might run. And I would look at our schedule, and usually you look at a football schedule, you've got, maybe 1 to 3 games where you're like, that game is a humdinger. It's going to be a 4-quarter dogfight. I know that I want the guys as fresh as possible for that game. So those would always be speed weeks because I would try to decay fatigue a little bit. I wanted them to move fast. I wanted them to do the workouts were slightly shorter, but the goal was let's move fast. Let's be athletic. On Saturday, I want you to feel like the fastest, freshest team on the field. So those weeks would be speed. So I'd plug those weeks in. Then I would look for our kind of cupcake games. Not that you overlook people or whatever, but you know who you're supposed to smack by 50.
Yeah.
And those would be our strength weeks. And so I would plug those in, and you usually get, 1 or 2 or 3 of those. And so then I would look at what the schedule looked like based on what I plugged in and see, based on training residuals, did I need to plug anything else in, or were my strength weeks staggered throughout so that I touched strength every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks? And if it was, and I didn't have to make any other changes, then I just left it. And then I would use whatever weeks were remaining. They would either be power or speed. And I would kind of make a coach's eye decision about what to do that week. And then the same thing with the buy. If I felt like we needed to pull back a little bit, then I would use a speed week that week. And the speed week would act like a download week or kind of a deload week, but I never used the phrases deload. I never used light workout. It was always speed. It was like, I'm going to reduce the load. You give me the same effort. But we're gonna limit the strain a little bit on tissues for the sake of recovery and whatever else. So anyway, that became the model that I used, and we still made progress. And we're still training, doing all our field stuff twice a week, right? So this was strictly weight room stuff, but that worked unbelievably well. And so I think expanding on that idea of those kind of microcycles, and how to lay that out throughout the year, and how to use that kind of on a continuing basis, and instead of in the same way that Cal's kind of doing it, that to me is really intriguing. Cal, I don't know where he got this figure from, but when he was talking about the 10-20 method, the logic behind it was that this whole hypertrophy, strength, power, speed progression that we go through, he said and this is where I don't know where the number came from, but he said it was something like 70% of athletes, that's a suboptimal way to approach training. Yeah. And so, and it was like, and he may have taken it a step further where it was like, it wasn't just suboptimal, it was actually like definitively bad. And so if you believe that to be true, or even if you believe it to be just suboptimal, so there's only 30% of your athletes that you're really doing the best thing for, that's not a great batting average, and then you throw in like, do those kids happen to be your best workers? I sure hope so, because if those are all turds, then you're really screwed. If you're 70% if the 70% is all your really good guys, then they're sitting there going backwards. So figuring out a way to use that concept to kind of optimize training throughout the year, and can you stretch it out for a really long-term period? I've never done it that way, but I think The private sector may give me an opportunity to take somebody on an individual basis and kind of run them through that and just really dial in the specificity of that and see what it can look like. And if you kind of get away from the whole like, all right, well, it's off season, so let's focus on building muscle. What if they're truly speed power deficient and you spent your entire off season working speed power instead of sitting there thinking like, well, I need to put an extra 5 pounds of muscle on them, just because that's the way that we've done things for a gazillion years. Because I think at the end of the day, right, like we always talk about performance, we talk about on-field stuff or on-the-court stuff, but that's what matters. But what you believe is reflected in your choices. And so if you truly believe that to be the case, you ought to be chasing those performance things more often than not. And the fact that we get away from speed, or you even have coaches that are just like, well, it's off season, so we're not going to train speed. Like you would be shocked at how many high school coaches I hear about. Ross, you might not be, but you'd be shocked to hear how many high schools it's like we're not going to train speed at all from the time that the whistle blows in our last game in the fall until we start up prep for spring practice in February. It's like, okay, well,
More than you think.
Yeah, and it's blowing my mind. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you guys doing on day one? Is it like some kind of short to long thing? Or are we at least starting with, Excel days? Or it's like, no, we're going to rip off some 40s in February.
Yeah. I won't say who, but I have a buddy that their program, they'll play their final game. I think they might run a 40 like that next week to get a time. And then literally the week before they start practice again in the fall, they run a 40. And
Yeah.
there's no sprinting in anywhere in between that time. So
right.
Yeah, it's still very prevalent, unfortunately.
So I think it'd be super interesting if you do, kind of a case study on somebody that you were working really closely with and really truly chased those performance goals more so than the traditional block model. What do you end up with if you did that for a full 12 months? So that's kind of where I'm at, and what's the most interesting to me. Some of these contrast complexes, I guess you call them, ways to work in. With our game day stuff at Bellhaven, we would train every morning. Every Saturday morning, we would come in, and the guys, like the ones and the twos, would come in before breakfast. And so we would do kind of a potentiation lift. And I started to mess around with different ways to do that. And so we did a combination of different types of plyos and different types of overcoming isometrics and some of the hyper speed stuff with bands and whatnot, but fine tuning that to see where we can get the biggest outputs or the best outcomes. That's really interesting to me because I was shocked at how many football programs don't do anything like that. You see potentiation stuff or game day lifts and tons of other sports. Baseball, there's tons of baseball teams got guys trap barring 400 or 4 plates on days that they play. But, a football program is just like, whoa, what are you guys talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I saw when we started doing that was our warm-ups were better. We were going to go get on the field at 11 o'clock to start warming up. The other team, they rolled out of bed 3 hours ago. They went to breakfast and ate bacon and eggs, and they're half asleep during the first part of their warm-ups. I was like, what happens if the quality of your warm-up goes up 75% because we did some active stuff earlier in the day, and the first athletic thing that you did all day is not when you walked out of the locker room to start Indy. So some of that stuff that's a little bit maybe non-traditional for football, but we all know there's benefit. Working through some of those things and making it palatable for football coaches is the key. But trying to figure out what's the best way to marry football culture and what's traditional with some of this higher performance stuff, because I think a lot of that hasn't leaked into football at all. So I think there's a big opportunity if you can figure out a way to present it to people and connect some dots for these coaches, how it'll help them on the field. Some of this more heady stuff and more higher, or I guess cutting edge type stuff or whatever, has a lot of potential to grow in the biggest sport in the country. So that's an area that I'm interested in too.
I'm gonna hijack this for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think Okay, so I'll present to you what my scheduling plan is for next year with our high school programs.
Okay.
For multi-sports, for multi-game sports, not football. So they play on Tuesday, Fridays, typically. And currently right now we lift on Mondays and Wednesdays, which is what they've kind of always done. And that's just kind of how it worked out scheduling. And I'm the first strength coach they've had, so they've never had another option. And so I am presenting, and I got this from Cody Harvey at China Springs in Texas. Totally different guy, but he's a Texas guy. And
Yep.
they do game day lifts, and they lift Tuesday morning, during the class periods, Tuesday and Friday mornings, and then they do a quote unquote normal lift on Wednesdays, which is essentially what I'm going to present. Because what that does for us is it gives us 90-ish, 60 to 90 minutes back of practice time, because I technically take practice time, and it actually gives me more lifting time that way. And it gets them moving in the morning. They didn't sit all day, like you were saying. Those kids will sit all day, and then they're going to go on the bus, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so with a multi-game sport, do you think that if you kind of averaged out, okay, in these 2 games, okay, we got really hard games, okay, this is going to be a speed week, easier. I think that'd be pretty smart to do, actually. And I think that because from listening to so many private coaches talk about training youth athletes, like I'm talking 12, 13, 14, because if there's a book out there, and I cannot remember the name that I'm talking about it, but I've referenced it before.
Yeah.
That talks about the best time to pick up speed development is basically middle school, pre-puberty, before that floor is kind of set. Just because the nervous system's dialed up, they can pick it up very quickly. Right. And then from there, we can kind of figure it out. So essentially coordination, doing that first. And so I kind of wonder about, because I also do middle school. So I got a lot. And so it's like, okay, in middle school, yeah, we're doing foundational movement and they're learning. But it's like, man, do I need to tie in really hammering some coordination, speed things, because that's the best time to pick it up. And then once they get into high school, obviously they're going to be dialed. They're actually going to be used to the speed work, whether it's in the weight room or whatever it is, and they can really, really peak them on that end. And so I guess kind of my thought here is, would you kind of use something like that with a multi-game if you had 2-3 days a week, or what do you think that would look like just off the cuff?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think the cool thing about not being locked into, hey, this is my methodology and it's rigid and unchanging, is you just steal the best tool for the job, right? So one thing that I used a ton of was overcoming isometrics. Anytime I was concerned. And look, this, you got to factor in coach psychology into it too. So if the team shows up and looks terrible, you're the first target, right? So
100%.
It's that game day lift took too much out of them, So you're after strain, right? And especially in those types of training sessions, like for me, the goal was always more CNS stimulation than it was like, hey, let's get a really big, training effect on this, muscular strength, whatever. That wasn't the goal. I liked the hormone response. I liked the strain on the CNS. So overcoming ISO, you get really, there's no muscle length change, right? So you're not doing anything structurally to the tissue at all, and you get what you're after, which is the big time strain. So I would always, I would use it as a speed session. We would always sprint a little bit. We would jump a little bit. If it was weight room stuff, I didn't care if it was an upper body day or a lower body day. You do pin press. If it's an upper day, you get some value there. We do overcoming ISO rows. It didn't matter. You can turn anything into an overcoming ISO, and 2-3 sets of that for a 5-second set. It's like there's a ton of value there. Quickly, and you're getting something of value. I think at the end of the day, the selling point is, hey, how many more training sessions per year do we get doing it this way? And what's the cumulative workload that you're going to accomplish in those training sessions? And it's like, how many more sets, how many more reps? If you go sets and reps, right? Like, how many more sets, how many more reps are we going to accumulate over the course of 12 months that we wouldn't have before? And if you can sit there and guarantee, hey, very minimal impact on performance in a negative way, then there's not a lot of sure things, right? But it's pretty darn close to a sure thing. Like you're smart enough that you're not going to go blitz them with something that they can't handle that's going to compromise their ability to play. But it definitely has value, and it's checking a box that you're going to want to check anyway, that you would have to take time out of a different training session in order to accomplish, which means you're going to sacrifice something else out of that training session. Um, so I think there's ways to sell that to an administrator, to a coach, or whatever, and there's tools that allow you to accomplish the goals that you're after. You just have to set the right goal and be realistic about what you're trying to accomplish out of that training session. Um, but I think to be more specific, I think overcoming the ISO thing, not to be the worst, but I just think there's tremendous value in that, and the more creative you can be with that, the more valuable that tool is. That kid 30 minutes after the training session isn't even going to realize that they did it.
Mm-hmm.
But you get the benefit of that work that they've done, and so I think that's kind of where I would always steer.
For the record, let the public know that the 3 football games that we did we did game day lists for, we won this year, and that's a running joke in our football meetings now, and so we're gonna see if we'll do that next year. But that's kind of all I got, man. It's a good idea, and that'll get me thinking there, Aaron. That's really good.
I think it was year 2. We would have the guys come through the weight room to do like a pre warm up, and it was just like we would do RPR, we would do some squats, some good mornings, and then I would have them hit 50 band curls and 50 band pushdowns. And as soon as we implemented the 50 curls and pushdowns, I think we went on a streak. Gosh, we won like 7 or 8 games in a row. I don't remember what it was, but if you tried to tell those guys that the curls before the game were not the reason that we went on the 7-game streak, they would have fought you.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. It's not that serious, right? Like that. Yeah. We did it one time, and they were like, they were sitting there looking at them, like flexing in the mirror in their jerseys before. I'm just like, all right, if this is what's going to get you there, great. Then curls and pushdowns have I'll fabricate performance reasons that this is valuable if you guys are willing to do it and you're going to go play good. So yeah, I'm all for the game. I think the kids, it makes sense intellectually, right? When you explain it to them, like, hey, the other team's going to, especially for home games, so they're, hey, these guys went and slept in some other, for the college sector, right? It's like, hey, these guys slept in a different bed that they're not used to. They had to eat food that they're not used to eating. The coach probably took them to Golden Corral. They went to bed fat and sleepy. They woke up lethargic. They had a continental breakfast at the hotel. And you're in here at 7:30 in the morning with your teammates getting after it, priming your body for performance, and they're sitting there like, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense, and then as soon as the light bulb goes off there, I mean, they're all like, the effort that we got on game day lifts was through the roof. And I would always use the jump mat. I was a little bit strategic with it because I didn't want them to jump a number they didn't like and then get in their head about their readiness that day. So if I ever felt like that was a risk, we would do like a hands on hips vertical, and then so it was just like, I beat my jump from the last round. But we would routinely hit vertical jump PRs late in seasons in those game day lifts, and I did it with softball. And I think we were 40 games deep in the softball season, and I had 14 girls on a game day lift hit a vertical jump PR. So I think there's tremendous value, and if you're smart about it, you can use it to accomplish some things. And I wish more people would do it.
I do. I really like what you said there. Just game day lifts, you're just going to accumulate more sets and reps across the year as well.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, especially in season when the attrition of practices and games just starts to wear on the body. If you get in good volume, or speed work, whatever you want to call it, and not beat them up, and just again accumulate more reps, like, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And just on a side note as well, I pulled out the training residuals chart twice today to show an intern and then a hockey player. So yeah, it's good stuff, right? If you know how to use it, it could really benefit your programming overall.
for sure.
All right, so we'll kind of wrap it up. And last question I kind of wanted to ask here: Cal's a big name in the strength world, and I have an intern who's interested of heading up there. If you're going to give advice to someone who's going to be heading up to Minneapolis, what would it be? Whether it's hey, don't do this, or hey, make sure you do that.
So Cal will not tell you whether he likes you or not.
Oh.
He just won't talk to you. So if you're just kind of shiftless and worthless and not self-motivated, he's not ever going to come out into the weight room and just rip you and say, like, what are you doing? Why are you here? Whatever. He'll just kind of leave you alone. It's like, hey, if you want to move up to Minneapolis and sit in a weight room and not do anything, like, it's no skin off my back. So it is a eat what you kill type of internship where if you want to go learn stuff, there's every opportunity to learn as much as you could ever want to learn. But you have to be pretty self-motivated to go engage in everything that's going on in order to get the most out of that. And the other thing that I would say is that Cal doesn't want to talk training 24 hours a day, which is, man, I hated it because like I knew that about him because I used to train with him too. So we would deadlift every Thursday. I think he liked me because I was the only like true meathead in the group, and he at his core is a meathead, right? So like Cal's like workout would be 2-board bench, chin ups, and curls with the arm blaster. So and then we would deadlift on Thursday. So like at his core, he's like a bro. And so I think I was on a big deadlift. He liked that. So he was like, hey, you want to come deadlift with us? And so it was me and Cal and this guy, Dave Osland, who took third at the World's Strongest Man, I think in like 2009, sixth in 2014. In 14, he lost to like Hafthor Bjornsson, Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw. It was like Zadrunas. It was like the 5 best strongmen of all time.
Yeah.
And then he was 6th. So like this guy's pretty legit. And so we would deadlift every Thursday. And so you're just sitting there like talking about life stuff, not like, I'm not going to ask Cal what his thoughts on triphasic whatever are in that moment. It's like his, sanity moment. And so I learned that about him. And so to see people like just descend on him with like, this is my opportunity to ask Cal Dietz about this triphasic question that I've had since the first time that I read the book.
Yeah.
Just don't be that guy. Like, just be a normal person that can have a normal conversation and go up there and work hard and you'll be fine. But it changed my life. Cal is a like, he's a guy's guy, right? Like, I don't know that Cal's like a big talk about your feelings guy. And so I don't know if he knows or he realizes or he thinks about it. Probably doesn't think about it. How many people's lives he's changed. He changed mine tremendously from way more than just a training perspective. Like that was where I realized like this was something that I had to do. And he's the most generous coach in the world. He gives away more stuff than you could possibly imagine. And so I've been the beneficiary of that for sure. And so anyway, it can change your life if you want it to. So go up there and work hard and don't be a weirdo, and you'll probably be fine.
It's beautiful, and we can kind of start to wrap it up on this. Anytime I'm gonna be near Cal, I always make sure I wear like this exact shirt that says wrestling on it, just because I know, he wrestled in college, so
that's right.
It catches the eye of like, oh wait, that's different.
He's not just a nerd. I like this guy.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And this has been awesome, man. Ross, any other thoughts or questions?
No, man, it's been great. This is really good. Really good.
Good. All right, Aaron, give out your social media channels and all that. Where can people go to contact
get you to 5,000 followers, baby? Come on.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I think it's Aaron Wood _SC on Twitter. I think it's Aaron Wood SC on Instagram. All I post is fiance related content on Instagram now, so it's probably a pretty boring follow from
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
Well, Yeah, I'm pretty sappy on Instagram. I'm more business, small business on Twitter. But yeah, I, I like posting on Twitter. I never used Twitter before. I always thought it had been around for so long. I didn't know people used it, but it's been cool, and it's crazy the amount of information that you can get from there. And so yeah, I try to be active on that. And there's some stuff, if you go back through the stuff that I posted at Bellhaven, I posted a lot of what we did.
Mhm.
Um, so there's some good stuff on there, and um, so yeah, be happy if anybody wants to follow me or hit me up. I'm happy to talk shop anytime with anybody.
Awesome. And then if anybody is in the Richmond, Virginia area, you are at D1 in Midlothian, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. All right. Aaron, any last words or final thoughts here?
No, and not really, but I think Bill's the connection that we all
Mhm.
have. I hope that guy knows one day. I hope he really realizes just how many people he's
Yeah.
touched,
Yeah.
either directly
Mm-hmm.
or through people like us.
Mhm.
Like you think about how many people Ross has touched, you think about how many people I've touched, and then multiply that, us by, there's 500 other people
Mhm.
that, Zach DeChant or Joel Jameson. Like, just think about those guys' reach. And it started with Bill. Um, I just don't know if he understands or appreciates like how impactful he's been in it's like he would never ever admit to it, but it's like for the in the world, like he's had a global impact, and like how many people ever can say that? My goal is to just be the strength coach that he is. Um, so I'm thankful for him, and it's just cool to see a bunch of other people that he's touched being successful and taking things they learned from him and passing it on to younger kids, and his legacy kind of extending beyond him. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Amen to that. I appreciate every, coaches meeting where he'd give us a good word about Jesus, and then every pre-lift speech where he's banging on the podium there to get everyone fired up. But
That's right.
yeah, no, absolutely love him, and so grateful and appreciative of how
Yep.
he's impacted all of us and all the athletes that we get to coach. But
That's right.
all right, well, for me and Ross, Aaron, thanks for coming on here. It's another episode of Victory Over Self Radio.